Good evening. This is John Bushka again, wearing a beanie this time. I just want to talk a little bit about my being a lone wolf again and being elderly, being over 80. You can probably see I've got a little lesion on my nose. That's a squamous cell carcinoma. A dermatologist already scooped it out, and it seems like my natural killer cells and T cells have been destroying it, but it's going to be surgically removed toward the end of March. I don't think it'll amount to anything more, but it does remind me, I'm getting older and I'm a lone wolf, and if something happens to me, very few people have very much direct involvement, or no one really has any direct involvement with what I've been doing online and with my books and attempt to make a movie and everything. So it would be a mess for anybody else to deal with it. No, I don't really have close relations in an intimate sense with anyone right now who really knows my business. That's partly the fact of not having had children, not having married, not having had a conventional life and conventional desires. And that's, when I had to come back and look after my mother, that's what happens when you don't have any children. That was from 2003 to um, 2010. Two people in my extended family on the mother's side have, in the past 10 years, have died of ALS. And I don't generally ask for money, but one of them was a direct beneficiary of the trust. And so, in a sense, the ALS Association, I guess, is a beneficiary now, effectively. And it's a good thing to give money to. I've had little muscle twitches all of my life, which is said to be a bad sign, but there's no sign of progression. I'm getting stiff as I get older walking, but that seems to be arthritis. So I don't think there's anything like that going on with me. But there is a potential problem on my own. Again, my own agency. I talk a lot about that personal agency, which I control myself. If you start becoming incapacitated and other people notice, and anyone, at least in Virginia where I live, anyone can haul you into court, and you petition to have have to have you put under guardianship and conservatorship and all of that kind of thing. Excuse me. I spent a lot of money on services for promoting my books in the last year and a half. Unusually, somebody noticed that might, I don't know, it might not go very well, but I paid all the bills and there's nothing delinquent, nothing behind. So that would be good, but you can have to defend your freedom if you're an older adult and from being placed under supervision and then lose your creative ability. And so I sort of took away my mother's freedom. I almost was required to, because I could be legally responsible in the last 18 months of her life, particularly in the last year. She had to have a caregiver around all the time. She stayed at home. There are places, a place near here where you can pay a couple $100,000 and have, rent an apartment and be guaranteed access to assisted living if you need it. But the way my trust is set up, I don't know if I could even legally do that. I get letters all the time to sell the condo, but where do I go? I mean, they think I'm supposed to do that. It might not even be right. But in Virginia, the idea that somebody can try to have you supervised is something when you get old, you think about. And I am over 80 years old. Just a couple of other thoughts. First of all, I meant to mention in the last video the idea of cry-bullying, the left, that's a concept. I don't know, the censorship. I started becoming aware of it in 2018, when this Sargon of Assad and then the fiasco with Steven Crowder and Carlos Maza in the summer of 2019. And then a lot of other people lost monetization, and then Facebook did the same thing. And it very quickly got out of control. But I think all of this really started with the right, with Charlottesville in 2017, which is about the time I was selling the house. I think the right actually started it, and then the left took over, and then George Floyd and everything else that happened in 2020 during the pandemic, and then all that's been going on with gender and everything in the meantime, the left kind of took over. So what we have is politics being controlled by people on the extremes. Both the far right and the far left are out of touch with reality. People in the middle want to do their own thing, especially me, want our own agency, and we don't want to be expected to be drawn into somebody else's fights. I think Rudyard Lynch, is that his name, is another YouTuber, talks about that. And what a fault is. He says that the extremists tend to conscript the people in the middle who don't know what's going on and force them to join fights. In one of his videos, he recently said that. And I think it's true. I think those of us that are in the middle we don't watch it, can be dragged into the battles and be forced to take a side. That's something I've been very worried about, as I said in the last video, and it seems to have stirred a lot of people up that I said that, but it's true. I also just would mention, and I think I wanted here to go to the whiteboard and just bring in, just did a little, here's a picture of a little Harmon circle. It's very crude with the 8 steps and the zone of comfort. And, parts of my story, of my books, particularly chapters 1 and 2 of the first book, I guess I can hold it up right here. Chapters 1 and 2 is the first book. The expulsion from William and Mary, and the way my parents were ambushed by this one. It happened on Thanksgiving weekend, and the way it affected them when they were out of town visiting friends and learned about it in steps. They had the anguish of wondering what was going on for a whole weekend in a friend's house. That's almost like almost like Carnage or something. I'm thinking of that movie when something happens inside a family. It wasn't that melodramatic, but that sounds like, me and my parents are 2 more characters, and there was an uncle that was sort of involved. So maybe there are 4 corners, and maybe you could make a Harmon circle out of that. The only thing is, it got better. The crisis, of course, would have been, I guess, the want was on, if I'm the protagonist, I guess the want was when I was starting to find some social satisfaction with the Science Honor Society, and was developing a life, and was starting to be aware of my own homosexuality and erotic interests, and going away to school was going on the journey. And then I guess the expulsion is the paying of the heavy price, but then the resolution was very long and drawn out. It wasn't something that has an audience sitting on the edge of its seat. And then the other part of my story is going from graduate school, where I actually was an assistant instructor and gave people grades which would affect their being drafted, the men, if they didn't stay in school. So I had a perverse kind of power. Had a little trouble with graduate school, but then it got very good. The last 3 semesters, I traveled some with other students, went to the West Coast a couple times. Very good experience. But to go from your master's orals and taking your master's orals and giving some final exams yourself to your students and grading them on a bus, and then turning them in and going home, and then going to the Army 2 weeks later, and then winding up at special training company because I was physically behind as a non-conforming male, and then getting to the point that I could pass the PCTP. That actually was would be a very grueling thing to watch if you filmed it. But it's kind of fitting it into a Harmon circle is kind of a problem, because I typically have relationships with people that don't seem to have a lot of stakes in the minds of people, like in a typical more intense screenplay. And typically I don't have the same people in my life over a long period of time. The Warner Brothers trademark is Casablanca as time goes by. That's sort of how it is. As time goes by, people change in my life as time goes by. It's not the same people, which is not good for the structure of a screenplay, because you generally want a screenplay to be kind of focused on, a person's want, and they're thinking they're finding it, than having to pay a very heavy price in terms of how it affects others or affects them, and having to go and change their philosophical beliefs, having a character arc, and then have their antagonist have a character arc in the other corners in their life. There's, I don't know, I think it's Tyler Maurer. He says you need to have four corners characters for a good screenplay. But I think Clive Barker, in the first page of Imajica, which has never been made into a movie, but it should be, it would be another Lord of the Rings if they did. And the first page of the novel, he talks about on stage, you only have three people at a time. So you need three people in intense. Is three a crowd, or do you need to have four people to have a good screenplay? I don't know. The problem is, in my life, that you don't have the same people all the time. The people keep changing, and I don't have a lot of stake that is real apparent to other people in the relationships I have. There's stakes for me inside my mind. In 1978, I had a situation with someone when I was dating. I won't get into the story, my last year in New York City, but the events that happened, even though a lot of it was in my mind, led me to decide to move to Dallas. And it started 1979, and at the time of the hostage crisis in Iran and everything. And it was a very tense time politically, as it had been before. In New York, we had the gas shortage and Arab oil embargo, and then we had the financial crisis when Ford, the city, dropped dead in 1975. So I'd seen a lot of things that threatened my stability then. So I don't know if now it's more dangerous or not. But when I moved to Dallas, because there was something that warned me that I thought gay men were in for maybe a serious situation health-wise in the future. I had found some things out myself, and so I moved, and that may have saved my life. Because in Dallas, the really intense epidemic arrived about a year and a half or 2 years later than it did in New York City. Although I met James Coran in a meeting in Dallas in 1982. I actually met him in a hotel at an early AIDS forum. It was called GRID. So I actually got very involved in helping educate people then. So I was a little bit of a personality in Dallas before there was even an internet. But anyway, that's kind of, my life is spread out over a long period of time. And the people change. They kind of about every decade, the people that seem the most important to me keep changing. And that's as time goes by. And so it's not like there's one love story like Ryan O'Neill's movie or something in 1970. It's not this one relationship or something that's intense where the stakes in terms of a normal relationship are really, having a marriage or having a lover or having children or something like that. Having close family members, the stakes aren't real. The emotional stakes aren't real apparent in my life to other people when they know me. So that makes writing a screenplay, I think, harder based on this. But that's something I have a couple of attempts. I actually have a science fiction scenario too that I registered with Writer's Guide East. So I'm busy at it. But I just wanted to, give you this extra little thing, because as you get older, your agency can be challenged by others, and also it's easy to leave the mess for others. And the world's really pretty permissive in a way in letting me do this. Even though I had this issue with filial responsibility from 2003 till 2010, when I had to come back and look after my mother, who passed away at age 97, just before Christmas in 2010, finally in a hospice the last 4 days of her life. So that is what I wanted to add to the last video today, and I indeed thank you for listening.